Hello and welcome. You're watching Money 9. I'm Sakshi Batra, and on this show, we're going to be discussing all about behavioral biases which tend to impact your investment decisions. Now, look at it in this way: if suddenly you find a 2000 rupee note unexpectedly in your pocket, in your wallet, of course, it gives you great joy. But what do you really do with that 2000 rupee note? Do you save it? Do you spend it? Or do you really invest it? Now, this human attitude to money is what behavioral science is all about. And to understand more about how your money decisions are getting impacted by any sort of biases that you may be facing with, I have with me a very special guest joining in. I have with me Mr. Ujjwal Arkalgur, who's an award-winning cultural anthropologist. He's an entrepreneur. He's a best-selling author of Microcultures and also is the CEO of MotiveBase.com. And he joins in on this edition of Market Masterclass with me. Ujjwal, great to have you with us on Money 9. Thank you so much for taking out time, and you're joining us from Toronto. So thank you so much for joining us this early. Let me kickstart by asking you about our discussion. First up, about what you do really. As a cultural anthropologist, what does a cultural anthropologist really do, and how do you apply this in the field of, say, personal finance, in investing? How do the two things meet?
Absolutely. First of all, Sakshi, thank you for having me on the show. As an anthropologist, my job is to study meaning. And we all know this innately. We all speak multiple languages, especially in India. And we know that words have meaning, and sometimes that meaning can change when the context changes. And that's in essence what we do as anthropologists, but we apply that principle to the study of meaning around concepts, ideas, trends, issues that organizations need to care about. So in this context, for example, organizations like banks, financial institutions, investment companies that have a role to play in how they engage with consumers around their money. That's a key topic for us. And our job as anthropologists at MotiveBase is to study what kinds of meanings people associate, consumers associate with the concepts of money, investment, asset. A lot of these words actually have technical meaning, technical definitions. We're not interested in what is technically true. We're interested in how the consumer thinks about it.
Absolutely. Understood that, and very well put in context so that we understand how this can actually apply in the space that we're interested, and we're interested in talking about money and personal finance too. So let me just start by asking you your idea of personal finance as well. Now, this space also has a very different meaning for different people, and at different stages of their lives as well, at different age groups as well. Now, for an average Indian, how would you suggest that their approach should be to this entire space of personal finance?
Yeah, first of all, one of the things we've learned through research is that the best way for us human beings, and we all have personal biases, by the way. I'm no better than anybody else. Everybody has personal biases. The best way for us as human beings to understand our own personal biases is to ask the question, what does this thing mean to me? So if we were to ask the question, what does money mean to me? We might realize certain things about the way we innately think about the use of money. So I'll give you one example. For many of us, money is access. It's access to experiences. It's access to traveling the world, to seeing places, to going to interesting restaurants, to spending time with our friends in our social circles. And if money's primary purpose in our lives is access, then we have an inherent bias to spend it in order to gain that access. And so if we realize that that's our inherent bias, then we need to figure out how to do that without, potentially putting our lives in jeopardy, 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now, when we suddenly realize we have no savings to retire or manage our family incomes or health needs and so on. So that's the key question for me. And I would love to spend some time with you to talk about three most common meanings that consumers in India associate with money, because it will help us unpack a little bit of exactly why certain decisions are made and certain approaches are taken when it comes to investing.
Sure, absolutely. We'll talk about that. And before I go to that, I wanted to understand, as Indians, we are known for our saving, the kind of heritage we've had, the kind of culture we've lived in. We are always encouraged to save in our homes, and we've seen our, elders do a lot of saving traditionally. However, we are still to catch up on
Hmm.
more and more people ensuring that their savings are financialized as well. So, how would you suggest the best ways that Indians should also move from savings to investments, to financialization of savings too?
Yeah, I'll give you a great example. One of the dominant meanings around saving is this notion of physicality. So in India, there's a important requirement that we need our assets to be physical. We should be able to touch these assets, right? Whether it's a home, a car, jewelry in particular, we want to be able to touch these assets. The added problem with, and I say problem and I'll explain why, the added problem with an asset needing to be physical is that it also gets attached with emotional relevancy, right? So family heirlooms, greatest example in terms of
Yes.
jewelry. And the more you get emotionally attached to your assets, the less it becomes an asset, because then the less likely you are to part with it when you
Oh,
actually need it to be liquid, need it to be useful to you at whatever point in your life.
hmm.
So, in many ways, that's one of the key meanings around money and investing that actually needs to change. So, for example, if you're a financial institution in India and you want to get consumers, especially younger consumers, to think more proactively about saving money, about having liquid assets, this is one of the meanings that you need to find a way to change and sort of unravel for people to help them understand why an asset being physical could be a potential problem in terms
Hmm.
of how they save or what they consider to be savings.
Absolutely. Now, you talked about two things which are interesting me a lot. One is the physicality of these assets, and which is very well a big concern for India because we invest in gold a lot. I want to
Hmm.
talk about that. But before that, you also talked about how our banks and financial institutions have been approaching the younger generation. Now, when we talk about this young generation, we've also been seeing this trend of a lot of peer pressure that they face while they whenever it comes to spending on lifestyle, which is why we're actually seeing this increasing culture of zero cost EMI on expensive phones to even clothes. Now everything can actually be bought on a zero cost EMI, which has never been a traditional thing that we are used to, because our parents and that generation, they're not very used to of taking things on credit. They only want to buy things that they can afford. But the new generation wants to have this complete approach that if they can buy anything on EMI is something that they can actually afford, and that's when they get into a debt trap too. So help us understand what are some of the biggest behavior or psychological factors that approach consumers approach to saving and investing in India, especially for this young generation.
Yeah, it's a great question. I talked about access earlier. It's a big concern for younger people, especially younger people that may now be in particular upwardly mobile. So, for example, if somebody comes from a family that has traditionally been, fairly poor or has less means, and now they're one of the first in their family to get an education, get a healthy paying job, the desire for access, and in particular, the influence of Western media and Western ideas of what access needs to look like, that plays a huge role in India, right? So
Mm.
they may watch, television shows or movies that come from the West where there is an assumed reality of what kind of access you have, the types of restaurants you may spend your money on, where you hang out with your friends, what kinds of, to your point, what kinds of devices you have. And
Mm.
so that, of course, is then leveraged by retailers and telecommunications companies in order to give consumers access to that. So the big
Mm.
question, if you're a consumer watching, the big question you have to ask is, what are some of the most important things I want access to in order to feel upwardly mobile. I don't think there's anything wrong in wanting to feel that way. We all want to feel in many ways like we're making progress in our lives. We all want to feel like we're doing better than maybe our parents were able to do because of what they were able to provide to us. So those feelings are not wrong. The point is to figure out what are the things from an access standpoint that are important for me? What are the things that are not? And then once you can separate the two, then it's a matter of figuring out, how do I work with the right financial institutions that will give me access in a way that is possibly financially healthier, so to speak? And I'll give you a couple of examples. There are some really interesting, innovative business models developing across the world of financial institutions that are saying, hey, if you invest with us, we will also give you access. For example, if you open an investment account with us, not only will we help you manage your money and help you save better, but we'll also give you membership so you can access discounts on special restaurants, discounts on travel, and things like that. So there's some interesting business models that are definitely coming to fruition.
Okay, that's a space to watch out for. But what you really advised is not easy to do, but you'll have to do a lot of work to be able to do that. The other thing that we've witnessed, especially in the last 1.5 years of the pandemic hitting us, especially with respect to this one segment, and that is stock markets, is that we've seen an influx of this new age retail investors. Over 1.5 crore new accounts have been opened. So people are on their terminals. They want to invest in stock markets. They are trying their hand out for the very first time. And the kind of move the stock markets have shown them is actually exciting them even more, because they actually are thinking that they have a Midas touch, because they've entered at a time when the stock markets have boomed and everything they touched actually turned into gold.
Right.
Now, often at this point in time, these retail investors tend to suffer from a lot of biases like overconfidence, at times regret, there is loss aversion, sometimes trend chasing, all these different kind of biases, which often lead to suboptimal decision making, which ultimately, eats away their returns on the investment. So help us understand how best can we address these concerns to protect our profits whenever we are investing in such assets.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the big factor here, Sakshi, is trust. So, the younger generation in India comes in with a different level of trust, and I would say it's a more positive level of trust in institutions in the country, whether it's banks, whether it's trust that my money is protected by the government should something go wrong. There's a different level of trust with the new generation than there was with the older generation. And that's a positive thing. That's one of the reasons why we're seeing an ongoing interest in being part of money markets and being part of equity purchases. But coming back to your point, there is on one hand, you've got trust. On the other hand, you've got the consumer still trying to do it themselves. And that's because the trust game isn't fully resolved. So what I mean by that is, there's still a long way to go for consumers to have faith in the fact that I'm actually better off giving my money to an advisor who has a portfolio whose job 9 to 5 is to actually manage money markets, as opposed to taking it on myself and thinking I can somehow manage this better than a professional. So there is a huge gap there. So in fact, we do work in India with numerous organizations where our focus is on bridging the trust gap, which is how do we create a level of faith among the young up-and-comers with healthy jobs. They have the opportunity to save. How do we create a faith in the fact that you may actually be safer to think about investing with professionals who will understand the ups and downs of money markets, which we may not, and it may be a much bigger shock for us. And exactly to your point, now I think the big fear is that there's a correction coming, and if the correction comes, then a lot of people are going to be in for a bit of a shock.
Yes, absolutely. And especially with newer and riskier assets like cryptocurrencies coming in, and there's an entire frenzy. We can actually see on our platform the number of queries we get on cryptocurrencies far outnumbers any other traditional form, or more safer forms like and regulated forms like markets or mutual funds, is definitely going to be a trend that that is why we are forced to talk about it more. But yes, there is a lot of education that needs to be done there. Pointed out a very interesting point that generational differences in the approach to money is something that we need to find out. So what are the factors that influence the way we think about money and finance, and how does it really differ generationally?
Yeah, I mean, the big factor is technology. Anybody who's sort of, I mean, I'm generalizing a little bit, but anybody who's under the age of 50 has a very different relationship with technology in the country. And in particular, anybody who's starting their career today or has started their career in the last 5 years, let's say, has a very different relationship with technology, because technology now plays a huge part in helping them manage their money, whether it's making payments, whether it's receiving payments, funding your accounts for investments, whatever it is. Now you can do that from this little device in your pocket. So that's, I think, actually a huge factor affecting trust, because there's still a big generational gap in India between how older generations and their openness to using their cell phones to transact versus the younger generation. So that's a huge factor that's affected this. And I think part of the reason for that is simply that when you grow up with a piece of technology, you are less fearful of it than when it is handed to you down the line. And then, of course, there's, people in their 50s, 60s, 70s at the moment have a different experience, different lived experience, right? They've lived through various kinds of political crises in the country, which the younger generation hasn't in many ways. They've had a lot more stability. So there are many of these factors that we look at as anthropologists. What's interesting to us is that it's not one thing. It's a combination of factors, not just socioeconomic, but political. It's a combination of factors in and around sort of cultural shifts and changes that all have an impact on how we think about our faith or trust in institutions, in the government, in private corporations, and so on. So I think it's a combination of that that's making for a really interesting marketplace right now. But if I may come back to your early point, I think the biggest thing for us is sometimes when I do conversations like these, where it's a consumer who's listening, somebody who's got skin in the game, so to speak.
Yes.
The biggest thing I always say is, if you ask the question, not, what is this? What do I do with it? How do I use it? But rather, what does this mean to me? If you ask, what does this mean to me? It will allow you to take a step back and think about, what is the purpose of, whatever this sum of money is, right? You started the conversation by saying, if you suddenly landed on, I don't know, 2,000 rupees or what have you, what would you do with it?
Yeah.
I think the question to ask there is, what does it mean to me? And then if you ask that question, you might be able to make a slightly more informed decision about what to do with that 2,000 rupees.
Yeah. And just to extend that, how do we address this impulse buying decisions? You see a thing, there's so many malls, everything is glittery. You may feel like having it even though you don't need it. How do you address this kind of a space? And are you seeing that a lot more in the younger generation now?
Absolutely. And the interesting thing is, this is not just a factor for India. There are many countries around the world where, access has been made so easy, where you think, don't even worry about it. You can pay later. You don't even have to do anything. Just sign on the dotted line here, right? And nobody reads the fine print. So it's a huge concern from the consumer standpoint. The challenge, though, is that if you think about the meaning around these purchases, you realize that there's a lot of what we call symbolic currency. So there's a term that anthropologists and sociologists use. It's called symbolic capital. So it's just like money, but it's symbolic in the sense that acquiring certain assets, certain types of clothes, certain types of cars, being seen at certain restaurants, acquiring certain assets gives us a symbolic position in society vis-a-vis others. And so that symbolic capital, the desire for symbolic capital, is very strong. And one of the best ways to circumvent that is to find other forms of symbolic currency that can compensate. So let me give you an example. If I realize that, hey, being sustainable, so being more environmentally conscious in my purchasing gives me better symbolic currency, then I might be able to find reasons to avoid making additional purchases, maybe because it contributes to waste. Right. But then it gives me a story, Sakshi, to tell at the dinner table when I'm hanging out with my friends in a conversation at a cafe. I don't say, hey, I went and bought these 5 things. I say, I'm choosing not to buy because we're wasting too many things. The reason I bring this simple example up is because both give me symbolic currency. In one, I don't have to spend a dime and I gain symbolic currency. In the other, I have to spend money. So I bring this up because there are other ways we can attain symbolic currency through the acquisition of knowledge, by participating in certain other interest-based communities and so on. So there are many other ways that we need to think about how to acquire status, power, prestige, and culture without spending.
Yes, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. And in the end, I wanted to just ask you, for first time investors listening to you, for all those people who are just starting on their journey of personal finance, of financial freedom, what would be your key suggestions, tips, so that they don't suffer from these irrational decisions that impact their savings and investments as they move forward to earn more and then have the power of money with them? But what do they do with them is the key.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing for me, and I come back to the core message, which is spend some time to think about what money means to you. And when you think about that, you will think about your upbringing. You'll think about the challenges you may have had. All of that will play a role in helping you understand what money means to you. And then once you know what money means to you, then you can figure out how to attain that. So if money means upward mobility, access to better opportunities, better jobs, then you got to think about how to best use what you have access to achieve that. If money means, providing a safe future for your children, then you got to think about how to achieve that. But I think having an understanding of what it exactly means for you will set the stage to have purpose behind it. And I think that's the key, to have a coherent purpose behind money and its use.
All right, Ujjwal, thank you so much for all those insights. Well, there is a different approach to money that we've learned today beyond saving, investing, and growing. First, talking about the meaning of money, what money means to you, so that you can make informed decisions and better decisions, perhaps, for your investments too. Thank you so much. It was an honor to have you with us on Money 9, Ujjwal.
Thank you for having me.
All right, and with that, we wrap up this edition of Market Masterclass, and we'll keep getting you all these interesting conversations, everything that you need to know about how you manage your money and your investments, whether it is in stock markets or in the realm of personal finance as well. Thank you so much for tuning in.